how does it happen? The Mendelian law is a simple statement, but it still is not an explanation. It does not reveal to us the full machinery that makes this possible. But if it is so possible that we may transmit almost any type of physical characteristic, it is also possible that we may transmit psychic characteristics. We know that the worrier may come from a family of worriers. We know that selfishness is intensified in families and may therefore become an outstanding deficiency of character for several generations. But there is more to it even than this. We may inherit with the great traditional stream of our life the culture of our life, the values which have dominated the concepts of all who have gone before us. But there is also this Zen inheritance from self, the inheritance from our own previousness, the inheritance from the lives that have preceded this one in the unfolding of our own experience. If we have lived as conscious beings through all of the experience of history, we have lived through every level of value. And this value has been gradually stored within ourselves, not as a series of details, so that we can come back or bring back into our mind the formation of a Persian helmet or an ancient Etruscan plate, but the senseness of good, the senseness of fitness, the recognition that in those days great art was produced, great philosophy was conceived, great religion was written. When we recognize that the Psalms of David, among the greatest of religious poems, have come down through over 25 centuries, we know that there was great understanding long ago. And this idea that no one has had any intelligence until the 20th century is quite false. And if there's any doubt about that, the 20th century itself is removing the doubt. Actually, we have received a tremendous heritage of sensitivity. There is a strange refinement that has come to us because we have grown up with the experience of value. We have known in our own background, in the mystery of ourselves, the sacrifice that men have made to give beauty to the world. Perhaps at some other time we ourselves have been part of that group that sacrificed so much. We know those who have died in order that men might live better, that have given themselves and all that they are to the dream of world peace, or to the brotherhood of man, or to the release of humanity from slavery. These great idealists of the past were serving value. What they went through, we have also shared in. We were at one time their contemporaries. Perhaps we were their very selves. But little by little, the whole concept of world value has moved in upon ourselves to become the basis of certain longings, certain strivings, certain desires, which are very difficult for us to put into words, but are the continuing expression of the growing conviction of that which is right, or the fitness of things moving within our own natures. We can see a phase of this in our world today. We can see the struggle that is now going on to preserve what we regard as a fitness. And that is the rights of peoples, the right of people to self-government, the rights of people to freedom and liberty and education, and these things all represent values which we believe to be real. And we believe these values because we have them in ourselves. We neglect them. We may deny them by any specific action of ourselves. We may be unwilling to sustain them, support them, or defend them, but we have them. And when we go against them in some way, we become less than ourselves. When we go against them, we lose respect for our own natures. And we must seek in forgetfulness and escape from that which we are afraid to remember. Thus, value also gives us the concept of things that may be. Now, in the whole concept of life as we know it, man is the only creature that has two propensities within his own nature, as far as we know. Man is the only living thing that knows that he is going to die. All things will die, but man is the only one who knows this. We have no way of sensing that animals are burdened throughout their lives by any fear of death. We know that they are going to die and that they are going to meet it in one of many forms. But there is nothing to indicate that they know it, so that perhaps they are saved of the tremendous neurosis which burdens man and has made him one of the most difficult creatures in the world to live with, for himself as well as for all other creatures. The second thing that man possesses is that he is the only being that we know of who has the power to envision a state in the future better than it is now. He is the only creature that recognizes itself as an architect of destiny. He is the only creature that in a state of war can still dream of peace. He is the only creature that in a state of intense competitiveness, such as we know today, can still envision a utopian world of cooperation. Man, therefore, possesses the incredible capacity to dream of a way of life that is the fulfillment of something better than his conduct today makes possible. Here again we come into Zen and higher Buddhist metaphysics, because actually man's power to dream that he is better than he can be in action actually means that he is already better. Man cannot dream of anything that has not already been attained by himself. Therefore, actually, if man can say honestly to himself, I would really like to live in a world of peace and beauty and harmony and security and friendship and love. If a man can say this and mean it and experience the need for this in his own consciousness, then that man has already attained that. Only he doesn't know it. Between this internal attainment and his external state remains the problem of his own personality. But he now has a personality that is in conflict with his own principles. This conflict we recognize everywhere, and one of the byproducts of such conflict is psychic illness. Psychic illness arises from the fact that man is growing up mysteriously in his own psychic life, and his material life is not keeping up with it. Now, this would be almost the exact opposite of what we generally think. We say to ourselves, man's material progress has greatly outstripped his cultural, and therefore we are in serious trouble. This is not the real principle, but of course it is the apparent principle. The apparent principle is that our physical progress has gone more rapidly than our morality. But both the physical progress and the morality are on the objective plane. Therefore, man has made inventiveness advance more rapidly than his ability to release his own value. This does not mean, however, that his value is not there. It does not mean that man's scientific knowledge has actually excelled his spiritual knowledge. It means that his scientific way of life has excelled his ability to use his spiritual knowledge, or to be aware of his own psychic integrity or intensity. Thus we are confronted with the fact that man has within himself the great vision that has given him religion, given him art, music, and all of these tremendous cultural things. But he is unable to live personally in a manner consistent with the best of himself. He lives by a compromise. And the more complete the compromise, the worse his material affairs must go. So we have a person whose internal psychic nature knows that that person is immortal. Yet that person himself is a materialist who has no belief in survival after death. Now, this is a curious situation. The only way in which materialism can be sustained is by carefully avoiding the recognition of the internal intensity or the internal pressure of consciousness. To meet this, the individual tries to explain away his own psychic entity. He tries to say to himself, I believe that I am immortal. I instinctively believe this. I can't help it. I noticed some time ago quite an interesting dissertation by Sigmund Freud, in which he was fighting and wrestling with the angels about the problem of immortality. Freud said in one of his books, I want to believe in immortality. I want desperately to believe in it, but I can't. I simply cannot fit it into my concept of the way the universe actually is. So here's a man who has within himself immortality, who can't die if he wants to, and yet is afraid to believe that he is immortal. He is afraid because it conflicts with the structure of his own mind. This is a good example of what Zen tries to reach out and correct. And that is this dominance of the intellect over instinct. This instinct in Freud, which made him say, I want to believe. This instinct within Dr. Einstein, which caused the same confusion. This instinct, to these men, was merely a residual traditional superstition. To these men, it was merely the continuance of a kind of folk belief. They could not realize that this instinct was themselves. They had to explain it away, because they had to retain the materialism which came to them to be regarded as the symbol of intellectual maturity. But the Buddhist, particularly the Zen, say very simply that if we are quiet, like children, we will strangely move into the kind of world that children live in. We will move into a world of beautiful believing. We will move into a world in which our own attitude changes everything. There's a wonderful fable about this in the Buddhist doctrine, which I think is rather to the point. The Buddhist tells us, for example, particularly the Zen sect, that the mysterious fabled otherworldness, the golden shores of Sukravati's blessed land, is not remote, it is here. Certain Christian mystics have held the same attitude, namely that heaven is here, only we don't know it. Bimi more or less held that view. So did Meister Eckhart. Heaven is here, but we don't know it. And the Zen says, if you will look at a tree from the outside with our ordinary eyes, you will see what you see. If, however, you look at a tree from inside yourself with the Zen eye, this tree suddenly becomes the jewel tree of the ancient sutras. This tree suddenly blazes forth into the magnificence of a divine being, because that being is there. This tree suddenly becomes radiant. The earth becomes radiant. All living things seem to be moved in tremendous fields of light and energy. Man, looking from within himself, sees the universe of the withinness of value. And suddenly, as he looks, the universe of tired, weary things, the universe of death and pain, suddenly seems to fade away. And the light in himself, touching all these things, transforms this world into the most glorious paradise conceivable. Suddenly this world is heaven. Everything in it is magnificent, beautiful, inevitable, eternal. And then in the moment, as in the case of Plotinus, the heavens close again, and man is back again into his own small fault-finding sphere of personality. He cannot hold this, not as yet. But if he was able to go to the inward dimension of life, he would find that he is in the same wonderland that makes beautiful the lives of children. The children have not learned to forget beauty. Men have not yet learned to remember it again. So in the forgetting and in the not remembering, we live in a dark world. But this darkness is in us, not in the world. It is our own inability to experience the release of the power of value within ourselves. The most valuable thing for us, then, is this power to release value, for it is the only solutional thing that we have. And this release of value gives us the nearest of truth that we will probably ever be able to know or appreciate. Perhaps all that we will ever need to know. For truth, for our kind of creature, is fulfilled in the realization of the inevitable and immediate nobility of that creature. Truth for man is for him to realize that he is a radiant truth being. Consequently, in the Buddhist philosophy, particularly the Jodo sect, we learn that the Amitabha concept, in which this magnificent being, seated forever upon the open petals of the golden lotus of the sky, with its radiance extending through 10 myriads of worlds, its benevolence touching into every part of existence. This being that to our Western minds is little less than a god, if we are interested in the concept at all. Certainly this being that seems to possess every attribute of a divinity, suitable for worship and veneration. Yet to the Amidist, this great concept of Amitabha is not a god at all. It is simply man come of age. It is what man is. Instead of viewing this as some wonderful, mysterious power that could only come from a being infinitely greater than man, therefore requiring a vast concept of theistic forces operating in nature, Amitabha, the all-compassionate, the perfectly enlightened, the Lord of life and death, the infinite servant of all that lives, who has planned in its own consciousness not only the salvation of man, but the salvation of every blade of grass, that not only is the illumined Buddha of mortals, but is also the perfection of the lotus and the star, the perfection of the bird, the perfection of everything. For into this great concept flows everything that lives. For in Buddhism there is no heaven just for men. There is only growth for all things. Yet this concept of this supreme, unselfish being that can never rest, never sleep, and never find peace until the least of all living things, each grain of sand, each mote floating in the sunbeam, has become in its turn a fully enlightened Buddha. This being is not a god. It is merely the goodness in man himself. It is the thing that man would want. It is the thing that man is. It is the growing up and maturing of the father and the mother sacrificing for their child. It is the growing up and maturing of great dedicated human beings, world teachers, who have died at the stake or on the cross for man. It is simply the tremendous fact that inside of man is a being so infinite in value that we hardly dare to speculate about it. Yet it is this humanity which is growing up within the person. And it is the recognition of this and the cultivation of this power which to the Eastern mind constitutes value. Therefore, the most noble value in all the world is the realization of our inevitable opportunity and obligation to grow. The only thing valuable really to man is his growth toward the fulfillment of his own destiny. Not because this destiny is a selfish achievement, but because this destiny is part of the inevitable process necessary to the fulfillment of all things for all creatures everywhere. In the Buddhist canon, consequently, we do have this feeling of value. We have the value of the realization that the search for value is forever the dedication of self to the mystery that is locked within the mortal structure of man. This dedication to mystery may express itself as discipline, as the continuing remembrance of the law in action. To sense this and to achieve it was one of the great principles of Zen doctrine. And I think this principle lingers on in many other religions of the world to become a very forceful element. Today we are searching for peace. Perhaps more than ever before, peace seems valuable to us. We would mostly sacrifice many things we have today if we knew that we would never again be faced with the danger of nuclear warfare. If we knew today that we could, by the surrender of material things in great measure, if by the giving up of much of what we have, or most of what we have, we could end the danger of war, I think most persons would make that sacrifice. Because it has come too close to us now, this danger of the thing which is not valuable. And suddenly out of all of this dilemma appears the value of something we have neglected, the value of peace. Now, peace or concord among nations is merely an extension of the peace principle as it exists within ourselves. We can never have peace in the world unless there is peace in man. And of course we mean in this sense essentially what we must mean, namely that we are referring to lack of peace between men. War is a human phenomenon as far as man is concerned. There is strife in other parts of nature, that we know. But the peculiar war that we fear most, the unreasonable and uncertain war, is the result of man's own conspiracy against man. And this is a thing for which we seek a solution. And we dream of the possibility of peace. We dream it because we know it. We dream it because every one of us at some time or other has experienced inward peace. We know it because some way we value it, even though it is not commonly attained by us or commonly available to us. So peace becomes value, especially when there seems to be great danger that it may be lost to us. Peace is more, however, than the end of war. Peace is the end of fear in man, for without peace, fear cannot end. And with peace, all fears can naturally be sublimated. But even here we have another value which intrudes itself strongly into our pattern, and that is the value of faith. Faith is something which we have discovered to be a strangely magical agent. So if we have to search for something that helps us with value, we can think of faith. Now, man could not have faith unless man was man. Man could not have faith unless for millions of years man had been growing up in a world in which certain mental phenomena constantly occurred. Man could not have faith unless he was the peculiar creature that he is. And faith such as man possesses is not possible to any other creature. But this does not mean that other creatures do not have faith of their own. But the peculiar faith that we have is a faith related to the need and means of our own kind. Man is the only creature that we know of that is capable of the full conscious experience of faith in self. Other creatures have faith in man, but man alone seemingly has faith in himself. The faith in himself is born of the fact that internally he knows the strength that is at the root and core of his own being. Man is capable, therefore, of a direct act of faith, because man knows that what we call faith is a believing in something that inwardly that man already knows. Believing is therefore, or faith, is a clarifying toward the conscious recognition of that which is already known. Faith is not an imaginary make-believing thing. Faith is merely the final evidence of the fact already realized. Man has the power of faith because man already has that which will sustain faith. Faith, however, becomes an open way by which the individual trusts himself to the full meaning of his own internal strength. By faith, man can step out into the unknown, not just simply because he has faith, but because in man there is the strength to do this thing. Faith, therefore, releases the strength that is, although for most people it is a substitute for strength, or is something in which we are taking a long chance, sustained only by some exterior belief or some conviction. But actually, faith that tells the man that he can do wonders is only telling him the fact about himself. But we do not know this because, again, we are locked from the very substance of our own believing. So faith gives us certain positive attitudes. Faith is value, then, and fear is lack of value. Faith as value supports resolution to use internal potential. And we know time and time again how this operates, how it moves in life. We have a popular saying that has been used in popular metaphysics and popular psychology for many, many years. Namely, that the individual can accomplish or be that which he is convinced he can accomplish or be. That if he has the firm and certain realization, he can achieve in accordance with that realization, so long as that realization is reasonable. This simply means in the Eastern philosophy of things that man, by the act of faith, claims his own birthright. Now remember that this act of faith has nothing to do with the fact that he's entitled to a new apartment house or something of that nature. This fact of faith has to do with his power to live according to greater value. Faith, finally, is the conviction that we can be better than we think we can. Faith is not a belief in a situation which will endorse delinquency. Faith is the conviction that there is more inside of man than he has suspected, and that if he needs it, if he very simply and naturally asks for it, with the proper attitude of his own consciousness, it will be available to him. But if he asks for it for reasons that are themselves without value, he will move that old law of karma in on himself and wish he had never done it. But faith to the Buddhist mystic is just this power to achieve that which is inevitable, the achievement of that which is near and proper. Therefore, faith is the bridge which unites the world of illusion and the world of reality. And across this bridge built of faith, man can move from the appearance of things to the substance of things. And he can also move the inner substance of his nature out into the world of phenomena to direct his action and his conduct in harmony with truth and with principles. So we have in the search for value the final discovery of value in self. We have the infinite recognition that the great source of all that is necessary to man has to be in man himself. It is the only way in which the entire universal program could be honestly administered. Religions in the West say that when man was created, God placed within man a spark of divine power, that God gave a part of himself into the creation of man. By this very concept itself, there is in the root of man a divine power, an omnipotence, an absoluteness, which is due to the very fact that the God in him is the life in him. And the fact that he is alive is a proof of the presence of the divine principle. In the Eastern philosophies, the presence of this divine principle is somewhat differently interpreted, but the fact remains that they also hold it to be inevitable, that within man is the solution to the mystery of himself. Within man is the means for the achievement of all that is necessary for the well-being of man, individual and collective. And this thing in man is the greatest value that man possesses. It is this thing which is truly his pearl of great price. It is this which is the treasure of his house. And it is this treasure which he is constantly seeking to understand, and with which he is desiring to establish a conscious rapport or relationship. Now, if this secret is locked within man, there are many legends and fables as to how it was lured out of its silent cavern. When the goddess Amaterasu or Mikami hid in a cave so that the light of the sun no longer shone upon the world, the other deities contrived a mirror and held it before the mouth of the cave, so that the goddess would look in the mirror and see what appeared to be another goddess more beautiful than herself. Because of the jealousy over this other goddess, Amaterasu came out of the cave and light was restored to the world. This is an ancient fable from the Nihonji. But it has to do again with this light that is locked within man and which must be lured forth out of man. And the thing that lures it forth is the reflection of itself. The thing that brings this life out of man is the very reflection of this life in the environment and around man. So that man, looking everywhere, sees merely himself. And from this position lures out of himself more and more of his own need to solve the mystery of himself. The legends are repeated in many parts of the world. But the stories are so familiar that most of you know many of these fairy tales and legends that deal with this theme. Actually, therefore, the bringing forth of value out of the individual is the luring of this other selfness out of the dark cavern. Now, there are many ways in which Zen and other doctrines have sought to accomplish most directly this procedure. But they all point out the very definite fact that all growth, even the luring of this value from within ourselves, must be subject to universal law. Law measures the means of things, the durations of things, and the rightness of things in time and under circumstances. Therefore, Zen, nor any other philosophy, can never break law. and can never cause that to occur which is not timely, or cannot bring about that which is not merited or deserved in the situation that exists. So Zen cannot say that there is some trick, or there is some secret formula, or there is some magical means by which man, unworthy of greater light, can receive it. Religion is not sorcery, neither is philosophy. Consequently, the achievement must be lawful. But the achievement can be lawful for the very simple reason that man's benightedness is the result of the operation of a law which causes man to reap as he sows. And if he continues to sow in darkness, he will reap in darkness. But Zen points out that this law is always subject to one thing, and that is that all of the thoughts, emotions, and actions of man are subject to the laws of existence. But the laws of existence themselves are subject to the infinite fact of consciousness. Therefore, consciousness never breaks a law. Consciousness is not greater than law. But consciousness is the means for the inevitable and eternal fulfillment of law. Consequently, if man, by a new statement of his own inner understanding of value, so states that he causes consciousness to move in terms of value, then man outgrows certain limitations, or ceases to keep the causes of his own tragedy moving or circling upon the wheel of destiny. Now, the answer to this consciousness problem to the Zen monk and to most Buddhist systems is the complete renunciation of false value, not by a long and arduous procedure, but by a process which Zen calls realization. And realization is the simple fact of man's intensive awakening to value. This is itself a psychological process, by the way, because the change has to occur in the psyche. That is the reason why no amount of mental attitude can work this miracle. No amount of affirmation can accomplish it. No amount of pretense or declaration can accomplish it. Because the only thing that can change man is that man changes himself. Now, we can claim anything we want to and remain the same. We can be engaged in the most learned discourse and be just as foolish as we ever were as far as circumstances within the psyche are concerned. If man, claiming much, experiences nothing of what he claims, then his psyche receives the experience of passing through this great claiming and no experience. It remains just as it is. Man inwardly is no more able to use certain declarations than man is outwardly able to use them. And Zen tells us that there is no change by claiming change. An individual does not become spiritual because he changes his creed. He does not become enlightened because he goes to a better church. He does not actually experience this psychic release because he devotes his entire life to reading noble books on great religions and philosophies. These things can never vitalize until they cause an experience of consciousness, a change in man himself. This is why the true person, the person who really believes, is supported by his belief, and why the person who does not really believe, though making great pretension, is not supported by his beliefs. It is only when this betterness becomes the fact of life and not a theory held in the mind that we have action. Consequently, devotion to a principle, no matter how noble this principle may be, has little effect if the individual who is dedicated to the principle is still the same selfish, egocentric person he was before. All of his pretenses, all of his statements have no value. The only thing that has value is the change in himself. So in Zen and in all these other mystical philosophies, everything depends upon the actual experience of direct acceptance of reality. This is value. This is the value that becomes so real that it is centered as fact in the subconscious. When a value is established clearly and firmly in the subconscious because it has received the total acceptance of the mental emotional complex, is moved into the psychic nature as a fact, sustained by the continual repetition of the performance of that principle. When this is achieved, then the individual, when he relaxes, when he is under tension, whenever it becomes necessary for him to call upon internal support, all this individual has to do is relax. Because immediately the fact which he has set up in himself moves out and gives him the strength that he needs for the circumstances that confront him. But unless this fact is established by intent, unless this fact has automatically taken precedence over the numerous non-factual attitudes, if this fact is not clear enough or strong enough to make a deep impression upon the subconscious, then nothing has been achieved. A person, by a series of negative attitudes over 40 or 50 years, by the constant statement of things which are not true, can develop a psychosis. He cuts a deep rut in his own psychic nature, and this becomes the basis of a series of powerful negative situations. The Buddhist says that by continually, over a period of time, reaffirming as fact, experiencing as fact, accepting whole-soully and living accordingly, a concept of value can be impressed upon the subconscious until this value pattern becomes automatic and subjectively solid. From that time on, this value is available. From that time on, the individual will instinctively live, act, and think in accordance with that value. And if this value is true, if he has built a real foundation of concept, of principles and law within himself, in any emergency that arises, he is sufficient to his own need. But unless the intensity of his own original attitude has cut this deep and clear mark, then it is not available to him. So in emergencies, the person who has had nice thoughts but never really done anything about them does not have strength. But the person who has convictions and has built them quietly and firmly over a period of time finds these convictions suddenly come out again through himself in the form of his spiritual help in time of trouble. So whatever he has put in there will come out. Also, it is more than just simply this, because if what he puts in is true, then it finally identifies itself with this subjective record of truth, which man does contain, and gradually helps him to build the total power of the internal over the external. And the more he builds of this internal fact, the more available the eternal fact becomes. So gradually he builds bridges between his personality and the great psychic strength which is within himself. And as this unfolds, he becomes increasingly aware of the Buddha power in himself, until finally, in the concept of the Western paradise, man suddenly beholds inwardly the entire radiance of Amitabha. And this radiance is his own eternal nature. It is the fact that he has suddenly transformed his world into a paradisical sphere. He has redeemed the situation of his own life. He has discovered value and allowed value to become the true and absolute ruler of destiny. In so doing, he has created his own paradise. And the collective body of mankind, by the same procedure, finally creates the perfect civilization, the ultimate world in which truth rules and all men live together in peace. This is the search and the solution to the essential principle of value. And so we'll have to discontinue now and continue next week again. And we thank you all for being here. Thank you very much.